glad to be back doing the deeper dive series, and you can expect a different video on a different topic regarding cybersecurity towards the last Thursday of every month going forward for the rest of the year. And we have other deeper dive videos where we talked on different topics regarding cybersecurity, but today the main focus is how to avoid the cost of human error on your wallet and business. I know there's probably a lot of business owners on here, or people that are wanting to open a business, and cost is a big thing that either trying to eliminate as much as possible. And so hopefully today we'll learn a few ways to do that on your end. Things that we'll talk about and learn today is, of course, how being cyber unaware can impact the security and overall your business and your company. A lot of times people talk about being cyber aware, being aware of cybersecurity, but we're going to talk about the effects of not being aware today. We're talking about different ways cyber criminals try and trick people or trick your employees into accidental and preventable errors that, of course, always have a cost associated with that. We're going to talk about those innocent mistakes, those human errors that happen every single day to companies all over the world, and how they cost the company money, time, and of course, affect your reputation. How to avoid those mistakes. We're going to talk about those towards the end of the webinar today. And we're going to give you 5 steps to do at the end, very simple and easy, to make sure you put your company in the best position to eliminate and hopefully prevent human error and the costs associated with that. So a few of you may be asking, well, what's the problem with not being cyber aware? You may have been not cyber aware for a very long time, or cybersecurity hasn't been very important to you and your company, maybe in the past 5, 10, 20 years that you've been open. Well, there's a cost associated with being unaware of a potential threat or a risk. And just to put it in perspective, think about it like this. If you are about to cross a road and you don't look both ways, there's no way for you to be aware of a potential threat like a car coming. And if you don't look both ways, there's no way for you to take those preventative measures to avoid that risk of being hit by a car. Now, that's a big, broad example, but the same thing goes for cybersecurity. Cyber attacks and ransomware attacks, malware attacks, they are a potential threat to your company. And they are becoming more relevant every single day. And there's more attacks every single day, every single year. And the cost of those attacks is increasing every single year. And so not being cyber aware is just being, you're not preparing for the threats or risks that could end up closing your business that you've worked so long to keep open. And so today we're going to talk about some real life stories of what maybe your company has endured, or maybe a friend, or what you've heard. But this happens every day to all businesses, from 1 employee to 50 plus employees businesses every single day. So this example, you can read through this briefly, but I'll kind of give you the recap of the story. And we're going to use a person named Sam. So all of you here, and you probably know lots of people that do this as well, a lot of people reuse passwords across multiple sites. And let's face it, having to remember another password sometimes is a pain. But there's always a cost associated to putting convenience over security. So Sam here, he was involved in a breach where his passwords were leaked. And he knew about it, and he forgot to change his password. And so he forgot to change it. And what happened is Sam's data was bought on the dark web. Now you hear that and, oh, that doesn't happen. Well, actually, that's very common. And it's very easy to purchase breached data on the dark web. And from that, these cyber criminals were able to get the password and the information that they needed to have the successful attack. And what happened is all that they did was get a password. And since Sam reused passwords, they had access to multiple different sources that password was related to. And what these cyber criminals did, maybe took 5 to 10 minutes, is just find out where he worked. And from that, they were able to access Sam's email because they found his email, and all they had to do was use the password that they bought on the dark web for maybe $1 or $2. And from that, now they had full access to his email. And for this specific example, Sam worked in HR at a small accounting firm. And by having access to his email, now these cyber criminals had all types of access to the company's W-2s, their financial information, company information, employee information, as well as client information. And now we'll stop right there and just think about, well, what if that happened to you? You may be dealing with very confidential client information, and they trust that you are taking the proper steps to ensure their safety and privacy of that information. Now, if you reuse passwords, or in your organization, you may not even have a password policy in place, something like this could be happening or going on right now. Now, I'm not going to tell you how this was preventable yet, but at the end of this, we'll talk about the exact steps that Sam could have taken, or his company could have taken, to eliminate or make sure the risk of this privacy breach wasn't possible at all. And if you have any questions as we go through these examples, feel free to throw them in the chat, feel free to throw them in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure and get to them. Now, this specific example, I have actually had firsthand experience with helping someone that went through this incident. And you can read through the details, and I'll go through the summary here. But here we're working with Jane, and she has a construction firm. And Jane's email has been breached, and she did not know about it. And what happened is that the cyber criminal had been spying on their emails, not interrupting or not causing any problems with in their email, just looking at the emails, gaining information, and waiting for the perfect time, the perfect financial opportunity for that cyber criminal to intercept an email and get whatever the payload may be. And we'll continue from there. So these cyber criminals were in their email looking at what was going on, and Jane had been working with a vendor of hers, and they were looking to upgrade their contract. And that specific vendor was Jim's Textiles. You can see that up there at the top of the slide. And at the perfect moment when they were discussing the contract, Jane got an email from sales at Jim's Textiles.com with a 10% discount. And what she didn't realize was the slight error or phony domain name, where instead of TILES, textiles, it was textiles, STYLES. And that's very common. Just overlook that. Maybe it's an error on their part. But what happened was, as soon as she saw that discount, she took advantage of it. And she sent $60,000 to what she believed was the vendor that she'd been talking to. She sent $60,000 to this cyber criminal. After that, she didn't hear nothing back. And at that point, Jane lost $60,000. And for this specific vendor, it was very important that she had this contract to keep her doors open. So she still had to pay the original amount to the vendor with the contract that they had been discussing to keep her doors open. Still lost $60,000 in seconds, just because human error. She may have been in a rush. She didn't notice that domain name error that, with proper training, like we'll get to, is what you could have used to prevent this from happening. But in my firsthand experience, the same thing happened. Someone that had been talking with us, they hadn't become a client yet, was sent an invoice from their client of I believe $10,000 to $12,000. It looked completely legit. They had been talking back and forth, and it was when it was time to pay the invoice looked completely normal as it was before. But what had happened was a cyber criminal had breached their email, had seen these conversations, and all they had to do was change the banking information on that invoice. And the person I was talking to, they sent the $10,000 to $12,000, paid the invoice as they thought was correct, and their client didn't get the money. And now that person was out $10,000, but still had to pay their client. Simple errors, human errors like that, that for a single person law firm, $10,000, that may be a lot of money to that specific business. In some instances like this may cause a company to go out of business because that extra cost, of course, is not accounted for. And so making sure you're doing the proper things to eliminate these human errors is extremely important. Now, our last example here, before we, of course, talk about how to prevent these, is something that happens a lot. And it is very hard to prevent, but there are proper steps that you can take. So in this example, we're going to talk about Phil. Now, Phil simply got an email from what he believed was a trusted source. And on that email, there was a file attached, specifically an Excel sheet of customer invoices. And all Phil did was click that email, click on that file, and then that's where the madness happened. His screen goes blank, and then everyone else's screen in the company goes blank. And then a message popped up. Excuse me. Your files are locked. Pay $150,000 in Bitcoin to access. That's all it says. They can't do anything on their computer. It's completely locked up. They can't go back. They can't access any information. And now the business is held for ransom. They're at a standstill. And if they don't pay this $150,000, what are they going to do? Now, the kicker here is that earlier in the year, this company wanted to cut cost. And for this instance, they cut them in the wrong area because they got rid of their data backups for the past year just to cut cost. And because of that, they had no information or no backups in place that they could refer to restore this information or ignore this ransomware attack. And so the only option that they had was to pay this $150,000 and hope that they got their information back. There's no guarantee. They could just hope that the cyber criminal will honor their word of this little brief message of giving their data back. Now, I'll stop right here because a lot of companies and people on here may have experienced a ransomware attack like this. And I want to focus on this price because this price, it says $150,000. That, of course, can change for any organization. And these cyber criminals, this is not something that they're just doing for fun. They're doing this for a paycheck. And if you're a $2 million, $3 million a revenue a year company, that $150,000 will probably be bumped up to maybe $1 million, 1.5, something like that, because they know you can pay it. And so $150,000 may not seem a lot to a 50+ employee company, but that price wouldn't be the same for you. And simply by cutting the cost of data backups, now they have no other option but to pay this. Now, I do want to talk about some preventative measures that this company could have done because this is an attack that happens often, but it could have been avoided if they invested the proper IT budget and cybersecurity budget into those data backups. So if something like this did happen, they could wipe everything and restore it to right before the event happened. So they wouldn't have to worry about paying that extra expense of $150,000 that wasn't budgeted in the year. Another tool that could have been extremely helpful is an EDR tool or an endpoint detection and response tool. If you've watched some of our webinars before, we talk about that a lot. But in a short summary, what that endpoint detection and response tool would be able to do is to detect that unnormal behavior of clicking that document and it creating a ransomware attack. Of course, an Excel sheet shouldn't do that. And so it would be able to detect that threat in seconds. And the key part here is isolate that threat. So only Phil's computer would be affected and not the whole company, which mitigates that threat and the impact to the company a whole lot. But overall, that EDR would be able to get rid of that threat, and hopefully you have a cybersecurity team in place to work on this as well. But that's something that we can get to as we go forward as well. But before we move forward, if you have any questions or maybe something like this has happened to you before and you'd like advice or maybe what you should have done, feel free to throw those into the chat or Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. I know there was a few comments, and thank you, Tom, for answering those. If this is your first time on, Tom Kirkham, he's also on air. He'll chime in on here in a little bit, but he's our founder and CEO, and he's cybersecurity whiz. He's amazing. So if you have any questions, of course, I'll get to them, but Tom will as well. Oh, I think I missed one. There we go. So the main thing I want to talk about after we've processed these examples is, what do all of these stories, these examples have in common? Well, first, all of these stories involved accidental mistakes. These employees did not have any ill intent, and they definitely were not malicious cyber attackers. They're not malicious hackers in all of these examples. These examples all included human error, and human error will happen. Human error is inevitable. And to be honest, 95% of successful cyber attacks result or come from human error. But what can you do? Of course, first, you can provide your employees with the tools and the training that they need to eliminate as much human error as possible. All of these instances could have been prevented, and I assume all of you watching would like to prevent this from happening to your organization by taking, of course, the next 5 steps that we'll discuss. But a lot of this goes to creating company policies and really creating that security first environment that starts with leadership, talking about how security is important and how it's not just the IT's job or your cybersecurity team's job to protect and make sure nothing goes wrong or make sure there's not a cyber attack, but it's really the risk rests on everyone's shoulder. Everyone has a job to protect the company. And helping employees understand how important security is really one of the first steps, and an important role in protecting not only your company and not only your employees, but your clients as well. And so I want to talk here about these 5 steps. These are something very easy, and these are small steps that you and your business can take to prevent these human error accidents. Number 1, training. Now, a lot of you may or be a part of a cybersecurity training that maybe you and your employees attend once a year, maybe once a quarter. But I'm here to tell you from my professional experience and what we do for our clients is continuous cybersecurity training is a must. And when I say continuous, we have programs where it's 1 week or at least 1 month. But if your employees aren't involved in some sort of cybersecurity training or cybersecurity awareness training at least once a month, then that's not enough to combat how often and how effective human error is. Now, with that, I do want to talk about simulated phishing emails, because that needs to be a part of your training if it's not already. And what I mean by simulated phishing emails, so phishing emails, to start off, are where a cyber criminal sends an email, like we talked about in one of the examples, where it may be from what you believe is a trusted source, but the domain name is a little off and may, instead of textiles, it's textiles. And so, of course, that's how you know it's from not from a trusted source. But with these simulated phishing emails, your employees will get, and it's very random, an email from what they believe may look like a trusted source. It could say it's coming from Facebook. And then, of course, there's steps to realize if it's not coming from Facebook, but say it asks them to change their password or put in their password for Facebook. If they do that instead, like the example we saw where your company may experience a ransomware attack, instead, it pulls them to another page, says, hey, you've been phished by Kirkham Iron Tech. This is for our clients, for example. Hey, you've been phished by Kirkham Iron Tech. This is how we got you. This is what to look out for next time, and shows them some quick training on steps to take to avoid falling for a phishing email. Now, I myself have fallen for these emails. I think I fell for one around Valentine's Day about confirming a dinner reservation for me and my fiance, and they got me the perfect timing. But literally, human error is inevitable, and it's easy. Phishing emails that cyber criminals send out in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, are very easy to fall for. Another step, and I think someone may have mentioned it in the chat, is password managers. To maintain a strong password hygiene or password secure culture, I strongly would recommend using a password manager. We talked about convenience over security and the risk associated with that. By implementing a password manager, you combine convenience and security into one. You don't have to memorize all these different passwords. You don't even have to worry about creating these passwords. With the password managers that we use, it creates the passwords for you. All you have to remember is one master password. Very simple and easy to use, but it allows you to keep track of all those different logins. Maybe you have 50, 100 different logins, and it still allows you to have a separate logins for each of those specific credentials that you may have. Now, this also includes dark web monitoring, like we talked about in our first example, where his passwords were breached. I believe it was Sam. His passwords were breached, and he didn't know it, or he did know it, but he didn't take the steps to do it. And with these password managers, you're able to see what passwords are breached, what logins are breached, and then, of course, take the proper steps to mitigate those. Step 4, and this is something we talked on briefly, is creating a security-first environment. Making sure you have clear security policies and procedures in place that help your employees know what to do and provide them with the tools that they need to make sure they're being as secure as possible, but also just keeping the overall security of the company in mind as well. And with different organizations, this is more and more important, especially if you have different compliances that you have to meet. If you're in the medical field, of course, you have HIPAA. If you're in accounting or a law firm, you have very confidential client information that it is your duty to make sure you take the proper steps to secure and keep that information private. And if you're not meeting those standards that you're being compliant by, of course, there's a cost associated with that. And so the whole theme of this is eliminating cost as much as possible regarding cybersecurity. And all of these steps are investments to help eliminate those costs of a potential cyber attack in the very near future. Now, this next step, step 5, is something that is extremely important, and a lot of these things you can do now, but this is something I would look into doing as soon as possible. And that is having an assessment done. And this is important because you need to know where you're vulnerable. And to do that, to know what gaps you have, an assessment is essential. You can't do that any other way. You may think that, oh, hey, we need this or we don't have this, but there's tons of tools out there, and you can spend all the money in the world, but when we're talking about cost efficiency and cutting cost, you want to make sure you have a plan in place before you start investing in all these preventative cybersecurity tools and services. So to do that effectively, you make sure you get an assessment done to figure out where you're vulnerable. Now, I'll leave this up on the screen a little bit longer. If you have a notepad, write these down. Real quick, just 5 easy steps that can be done to eliminate some of the examples that we talked about today. Now, of course, this 5 steps, that may sound like a lot, but that's only 5 steps. And like I said, there's tons of tools and solutions that you can use to implement each of those steps. But as a business owner, there's time and money and resources that you may not have to look at all of this, to take care of all this, to figure out what you need or what you don't need. And that is where I come into play. That's where Kirkham Iron Tech comes into play, where we help take care of all of that for you so you can focus on your business, and we focus on taking care of security and securing your overall business and your clients and your employees. Now, I mentioned that assessment step in the last slide, and I want to make sure that you all know that we do offer free cybersecurity and risk assessments. Those assessments that you are wondering, okay, how do I figure out where I'm vulnerable? How do I figure out even where I start? We offer that for completely free. It takes about 30-ish minutes, 30, 45 minutes. It's very non-technical, non-intrusive, but overall, we take care of that first step that you need to get started on overall securing your organization. Now, if you want more information about the assessment, or if you would like to overall just talk more about the 5 steps that we discussed today, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to reach out about an assessment. You can email me, set a meeting, feel free to call me. But overall, we're here to help implement those 5 steps and overall get you started on that first step to securing your company, which is that free assessment. Now, I know we're coming up on a 30-minute mark, but I want to make time for questions. I want to make sure I answer all of your questions here. And I want to give Tom a chance to chime in if there's anything that you want to touch on from a business owner perspective and how you've dealt with some of these instances, or made sure you implement these, of course, as well for your company, which all those 5 steps we do, but your approach to those as well. And I'll look at these questions real fast.
Yeah, I just want to say, when you're thinking about the investment in IT and the investment in cybersecurity, it doesn't mean you need to think about benchmarking. Okay, understand what your peers are spending on average for IT, and then by extension on cybersecurity. And we know for professional service firms, accounting, law firms, things like that, we know that it varies between 10 to 16% of your gross revenues. That's one of the reasons why we like to know what your company's annual revenues are. And some people fall into the trap of saying, well, okay, my peers spend 10%, but look how smart and how good of a manager or how good of an owner, or how much more money I'm putting in my pocket because I'm only spending 5% on IT. And that's not the right way to do it. You need to look at that 5% and ask yourself, why are we only spending 5%? Because more often, much more often than not, you've got gaps. And if it's in IT, you're not realizing the full productivity and efficiency gain. In other words, it's actually costing you money because you're not spending what your peers do. When it comes to cybersecurity, it's a real simple decision to not spend anything on it. But I got a whole list of things I can tell you about why that's wrong. And the simple fact of the matter is, I've put it over in chat, but we're talking this year, there'll probably be 600 million ransomware attacks worldwide. These are done at scale. They don't care how small you are. They don't even know who you are. It's not personal. They're just playing a numbers game. They send out 100,000 phishing emails, and they get 1% become victims, and they collect an average of just $10,000
That's a big payday.
ransom. That's $10 million, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a big payday.
I see, especially the smaller the organization, I see that's one of the failures that I see, is the mistaken belief that, well, we're only spending 7.5% on IT. And the way the numbers work, you already know what the overall spend is, and it roughly works out to 10% of the overall IT budget should be spent on enterprise grade, best in class, best practices, cybersecurity tools and services. That's kind of rough numbers.
And I want to touch real quickly, because you mentioned the word best in class or best of breed tools and cybersecurity practices. Verna here, she mentioned a question: are these password managers ever breached? And the answer is yes, password managers have been breached. I believe someone mentioned, I think it was LastPass, they had a recent breach, but that's when we're talking about cybersecurity tools and best in class or best of breed cybersecurity tools. Same goes for picking the right password manager. What we provide for our clients are tools that are best in class, enterprise grade, and we have tested them for months before we even roll it out to our clients to make sure an instance where, like LastPass, where a password manager was breached, make sure that's not something that we're offering to our clients, and making sure that's not an option. And so, yes, password managers have been breached, but that's when it goes into the effect of making sure you pick the right password manager to avoid that risk at all costs. And that's what we help our clients do.
Yeah. And the two that I put in chat, as far as I know, they've never had a breach. We wouldn't have selected Keeper if they had a breach, I promise you. And I used LastPass for years. And I began to see sloppy coding practices because I have a background in software development. And I just made me uneasy.
Mhm.
You know, if they're not building their product very well, what kind of security gaps do they have?
Yep.
And so we switched years ago. And then last year we find out that they got their
A
source
major
code.
breach.
They
Yeah.
got into their source code. So I was right. But it is still, a lot of people say, well, it gives me a single point of failure, or what happens if the password manager gets breached? Those are all concerns. Those are all risk,
Mhm.
but there's no better way to do this properly. It is still a best practice.
Yep.
Will that be true next year? Maybe, maybe not, but probably.
Mhm.
I don't,
Uh,
this passwordless technology, it's been promised for 20 years and it's still not here.
Yep.
There's a question in there I want to answer, Devin.
Yeah. Bob's, and I can touch on Verna's.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. So the first question is, how effective is it to use one browser for general web surfing and another one for sensitive information only, using both browsers in private browsing modes? Oh, boy, it's a lot to unpack there. Okay. First of all, I know it's not part of your question, but never store passwords in a browser. Okay. Period. Except I don't have a problem with it if you're on a Mac and it's Safari,
Mhm.
because it utilizes Apple's keychain technology, which is incredibly secure, but never store them in Chrome.
Yep.
Firefox, the best thing to do is just turn it off and never do it. Now, as far as your question goes, I I think there's more important, if you're talking about this marketing data and spying on you, and then, you're looking at bed mattresses, and the next thing you're on Facebook and you're seeing nothing but ads for mattresses. If that's what you're referring to, just doing private browsing on any good browser, which I would say Safari for Mac and Firefox for everything. I don't like Chrome. Google's business model is to sell you. So I've got problems with Google, and their browser has been breached. The passwords in the Chrome browser has been breached. But I don't really think about it too much, and I'm very privacy conscious. But unfortunately, the United States isn't. This is the only Western democracy that doesn't have consumer privacy laws.
Mhm.
I know the state of New York does, and I know the state of California, and there's others
California.
that are considering them. But nationally, we don't have a privacy law. And it's the only one out of Western democracies, which
Yep.
is just mind boggling to me. So if that's the purpose of doing that, I personally, I just don't think about it too much.
Yep.
I do use private browsing a lot, but I just recognize the fact without laws in place, there's not much I can do. From
Yeah.
a security standpoint, once again, it's kind of out of our hands, especially with artificial intelligence and all of these breaches and data breaches that you go out on the dark web, like Davin mentioned, you can just get the data. The criminals can just get the data.
Mhm.
And with AI and data triangulation algorithms, they know a lot about you. And, but I don't do what you're suggesting. And I don't know if it's really worth the effort to think about it.
Yeah.
So
I do want to touch on Verna's question real quick. She said, say you do select the best, or say the best password manager, and still have a breach. What's the next steps? So
is she talking about a password manager?
I'm gonna go around that. So say you do select the best. Now, the answer to that, the quick answer is having layers of defense, or defense in depth. Now you have one best in breed security tool in place, but you don't solely rely on that to stop everything. You have multiple layers. So if one layer, or best of breed security, does become compromised, or there is an error and something falls through, you have another line of defense to stop that attack or stop whatever's going on. And to build those layers of defense, that's where a cybersecurity team does come in, because they help you build those layers specifically to what your vulnerabilities are, what your business needs, and of course what you're trying to protect. And so if you do pick the best and there is a breach, that next step is relying on that other line of defense that you have in place. And Tom, you can add to that if you want to.
I want to make it clear that password manager's sole purpose for existing and the way they stay in business is to make security job one. the LastPass, and I don't want to give everybody the impression that there's a lot of breaches in password managers. It's extremely rare.
Very difficult.
And LastPass has been around for well over 20 years, maybe over 30. It's been around for a long time. And the only other one that I'm personally aware of is Bitwarden.
Yep.
But in both of those cases, the user's credentials were reportedly not accessed. So if you understand the fundamental foundation and architecture of password managers, even they themselves can't access your credentials. It's when you create a new, or you save a new set of credentials in, as far as I know, any of the password managers, but I already gave you the two best ones, best in class ones. It's encrypted before it even leaves the device. So even though it shows up on your phone, that whole internet highway that it went down in the servers at the password manager, none of that data is accessible by anyone. Only you can access that data. So even in those two extremely rare instances where they had a security incident, the credentials were not stolen. Now, I've got a whole different problem when the source code has been accessed and corrupted, because now we have no idea of what's going on that. But reportedly, LastPass is not, the hackers did not get any credentials. I think they've got bigger problems. So I don't want to, but once again, just to reiterate, what's the alternative? It's still considered a best practice. You're going to write sticky notes, put it under your keyboard. You're going to keep a notepad with you wherever you go, and
Don't give
write
them
down
ideas
that can be lost. That's the data's not encrypted in, unless you know how to write in 256-bit encryption. So it is a risk. There's no doubt, but it's minuscule. There's a risk in everything, but it's minuscule. And just one more time, it's still best practice. And up until then, we're going to continue to recommend it, because it's the only way to ensure uniqueness, to make people quit reusing passwords. It is convenient. And if you're somebody like me that's got whatever I have, 2,000 sets of credentials that I've collected over 30 years, it's the only practical method to do it.
These are great questions. I really, really appreciate this. If you have any other questions, throw them in there. We'll stay on just for a little bit longer, but I do want to remind you, if you have any other questions that you think of down the road, write down my email or my phone number, and feel free to reach out at any time. But we will offer this free assessment today and tomorrow. So if you think about it, hey, tomorrow, yes, I do want to schedule that assessment, reach out and we'll be happy to offer that to you. And like I said, very short time commitment. It's completely free, but it's the overall perfect way to get started on securing your company.
Yeah. And Devin, I want to add to that a little bit. A lot of people think that we offer the free assessment so we can sell you stuff. And that's true. Okay. But we believe not only in best practices, but doing standards and doing the right things. And if anyone just bothers to look up NIST cybersecurity framework, it's from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. They don't make any money off of providing this information. They do it as a public service. And that cybersecurity framework has 5 steps to it. What do you think the first one is? It's a risk and vulnerability assessment. It is the first step. And if you do nothing but get the risk assessment, you know more after it than you do right now. So
you can get the
I would
assessment,
rather
take it and
people at
run.
least know their vulnerabilities and make an intelligent decision. But and we do a lot of different types. We kind of, most of the time it's called an audit, but it's a risk assessment. We can do full on NIST. And then we also go with other standards from ISO, and they're all interrelated, right? If you follow NIST, you're going to hit a bunch of stuff. If you've got compliance issues, that you're going to fall right into it. And so it's not just a sales tactic. Okay. You really will know a lot more about the condition of your ship by afterwards. And an uninformed, or dare say it, ignorant owner or manager is not managing effectively or properly. So, you may hate to hear it, but The very first step is finding out what your vulnerabilities are and acknowledging them and then addressing them.
Yep.
Okay. So
Uh,
it's not just a cheesy sales thing. It's something you really need. So
to make it easy, we threw the meeting link in the chat box for her to use that. But if there's not any other questions, we'll leave the link up in there for a little bit longer. But I do want to remind you, this is something that we do every month. If you have a specific topic that you'd like to learn about or you'd like for us to discuss, feel free to throw it in there and we'll make sure and try to add that to our list of deeper dives at the end of the month, at the last Thursday of the month, every month. And we look forward to talking to you all again soon.